She threw me on the street the day after my daughter's funeral, claiming the house was his now. At the will reading, he laughed. Hope you enjoy being homeless, Gordon. Then the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now hit that like button if you enjoy stories about karma, and let me tell you how this all started. Because sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal exactly who they really are. The call came at 2:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. Bradley's voice on the other end was strained, panicked. Gordon, something's wrong. Lindsay's chest. She can't breathe. I can't. The line went dead. My name is Gordon Hayes. I'm 58 years old, and that phone call changed everything. By the time I reached the hospital, my 35-year-old daughter was gone. Massive heart attack, the doctor explained with clinical detachment. Nothing they could do. Lindsay, my only child, my world since my wife passed 8 years ago, was simply gone. Bradley stood beside me in the hospital waiting room, his face showing shock, but I caught something else in his expression. Relief? No. Surely I was imagining things in my grief. What happens now? I whispered, still unable to process that Lindsay, my healthy, vibrant daughter, had just vanished from my life. Bradley straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, his composure slipped. Now we deal with reality, Gordon. Lindsay's gone, and I have decisions to make. The coldness in his voice sent a chill through me. We'd never been close, Bradley and I, but Lindsay had always been the bridge between us. She'd met him 4 years ago at the hospital where she worked as a registered nurse. He was a sales representative for medical equipment, charming and smooth talking. I never trusted him from day one, but Lindsay was in love. Now that bridge was gone, and I was beginning to understand just how deep the chasm really was. Of course, son. We'll get through this together, I said, reaching for his shoulder. He pulled away. We'll see about that. I should have recognized the warning in those words. Instead, I attributed his coldness to shock. People grieve differently, I told myself. Some become emotional, others turn inward. Bradley was clearly the latter. The funeral arrangements consumed the next 3 days. I offered to help pay for everything. Lindsay had been my only child after all, but Bradley insisted on handling it himself. I'm her husband, he kept saying. I know what she would have wanted. Fair enough. I focused on writing her eulogy, calling relatives, and trying to hold myself together. At 58, I had buried my parents and my wife, but losing a child felt like the worst pain imaginable. The night before the funeral, as I sat in what had been my small bedroom in the house Lindsay and Bradley shared, I found myself staring at the framed photos on the dresser. Lindsay graduating nursing school, Lindsay and Bradley's wedding, Lindsay holding her nephew at Christmas last year. What I didn't see were any photos of Lindsay and me from recent years. Bradley had systematically removed them, I realized. When had that happened? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Bradley stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to hide the calculating look in his eyes. We need to talk, Gordon. The funeral was beautiful. I'll give Bradley that. The flower arrangements were elegant. The music was Lindsay's favorite hymns, and the reception afterward was perfectly orchestrated. What wasn't beautiful was watching my son-in-law play the grieving widower while making pointed comments about moving forward in new chapters. I stood in the receiving line accepting condolences from friends and family when I overheard Bradley talking to his brother Kevin behind the flower arrangements. The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 3 years, he was saying in a low voice, and without the extra expenses. Extra expenses? What extra expenses? What about Gordon? Kevin asked. Where will he go? Bradley's laugh was sharp and bitter. That's not my problem anymore. He can figure it out like the rest of us adults. My blood ran cold. I'd been living with them for 3 years, ever since I'd sold my own house to help with their down payment. Lindsay had insisted it would be temporary, just until I found something smaller and more manageable after retirement from teaching shop class at the high school. Somehow temporary had stretched into permanent, and I'd grown comfortable in the routine of helping with house maintenance, cooking dinner, being useful. I fixed their leaky faucets, maintained their yard, taught Lindsay how to change her car's oil. Apparently I'd been naive. Gordon. Bradley appeared at my elbow, his public face firmly in place. Could you help me in the kitchen? There are some things we need to discuss. I followed him through the crowd of mourners, nodding at neighbors and accepting final hugs from my sister, who was flying back to Arizona in the morning. In the kitchen, Bradley closed the door and turned to face me. I'm going to be direct, he said, his voice calm and businesslike. This house is in Lindsay's and my name, which means it's mine now. I need time and space to process my grief without complications. Complications? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. You living here, Gordon? It's not working anymore. I need my privacy. The words hit me hard. Bradley, I understand you're grieving, but surely we can. No, he held up a hand. I've made my decision. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your things. That should be plenty of time. I stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who'd once called me dad at family dinners, who'd hugged me when Lindsay said yes to his proposal. That man was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. Where exactly do you expect me to go? Bradley shrugged. You're a grown man, Gordon. You'll figure something out. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Lindsay would be horrified by this conversation. Lindsay's dead. The words came out flat, final. And the sooner you accept that, the better off we'll both be. I spent the rest of that night walking through the house, remembering the kitchen where Lindsay and I used to cook Sunday breakfast together, the living room where she'd curl up with a book after long shifts at the hospital, the garage where I'd taught her to change oil and check tire pressure, skills her mother never learned. Every corner held a memory, and Bradley wanted to erase them all, including me. I packed my entire life into 4 suitcases and 3 boxes. 5 to 8 years, reduced to what would fit in the trunk and back seat of my old Ford pickup. As I folded my clothes and wrapped my few remaining photographs, I kept waiting for Bradley to come upstairs and apologize, to say he'd spoken in grief, and of course I could stay until I found somewhere else to go. He never came. Instead, at exactly 6:00 p.m., the next day, he appeared in my doorway with his arms crossed. Time's up, Gordon. I zipped the last suitcase closed and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for 3 years. The walls were bare now, stripped of the few personal touches I'd been allowed to add. It looked like a guest room again, which I supposed it always had been. I'll need a few more minutes to get everything to the truck, I said. I'll help you. It wasn't an offer, it was a statement. Bradley wanted me gone, and he wanted to make sure it happened quickly. We made 4 trips in silence. The first trip I carried my toolbox and some clothes. Bradley grabbed a box of my books, handling it like it contained something distasteful. On the second trip, I took more clothes and my old photo albums. Bradley carried another box, this one containing my few remaining mementos from my teaching days. The third trip was the hardest. I carried the small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to my wife along with the quilt Lindsay's grandmother had made. Bradley took the last box of miscellaneous items, my coffee mug, a few kitchen utensils I'd brought when I moved in, some paperwork. On the final trip, I grabbed my remaining suitcase and the small TV from my room. Bradley carried nothing, just walked beside me to make sure I was really leaving. As I loaded the last box into my pickup, I turned to say goodbye, maybe to make one final appeal to whatever remained of his humanity. I know you're angry with me for some reason, I said quietly. I wish I knew what I'd done wrong so I could fix it. Bradley's expression didn't soften. You didn't do anything wrong, Gordon. You just exist in my space, in my life, in my way. Lindsay felt sorry for you, but I don't. The honesty was brutal and somehow cleaner than the polite fiction we'd been maintaining. I got into my truck and rolled down the window. Will you at least tell me if there's going to be a formal reading of Lindsay's will? I assume she left something. Why would she leave you anything? Bradley's voice was genuinely puzzled. You're not her husband, and it's not like you ever contributed financially to our household. The irony was so sharp, it actually made me smile. The $40,000 I'd given them for the down payment might disagree with that assessment. But clearly Bradley had either conveniently forgotten or genuinely convinced himself it had been a gift. Of course, I said. Silly of me to assume. I drove away without looking back, heading toward the Hampton Inn on Route 15. It was the closest hotel I could afford while I figured out what came next. In the rearview mirror, I watched Bradley stand in the driveway until my truck disappeared around the corner. Even then, I could see his silhouette in the distance, arms still crossed, making sure I was really gone. The drive to the hotel took 20 minutes through streets I'd known for years, past the high school where I'd taught shop class for 30 years, past the diner where Lindsay and I used to grab breakfast on Saturday mornings, past the hardware store where I'd bought supplies for countless home improvement projects over the years. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. I was homeless at 58, cast out by my own son-in-law on the day after my daughter's funeral. At the hotel, I checked in for a week and carried my belongings to a generic room that smelled like industrial cleaning products and broken dreams. I sat on the polyester bedspread and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Who was this man looking back at me? A widower, now childless, homeless, and apparently worthless in the eyes of the only family he had left. But as I sat there in that sterile room, something unexpected began to stir in my chest, not despair, though that was there too. Something sharper. something that felt almost like anticipation. Bradley thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully discarded the inconvenient father-in-law and claimed his prize. What he didn't know was that Lindsay had been a much better daughter than he'd ever given her credit for. I unpacked slowly, trying to make sense of my new reality. The hotel room had a small table and chair by the window, a tiny bathroom with thin towels, and a bed that creaked when I sat down. It wasn't much, but it was mine for the week I'd paid for. I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments online. Senior living communities, one-bedroom rentals, anything I could afford on my teacher's pension and Social Security. The numbers were depressing. Most places wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. That would eat up most of my savings, leaving me little cushion for emergencies. I'd taught shop class for 30 years, saved what I could, lived modestly. But helping Lindsay and Bradley with their down payment had taken a big chunk of my nest egg. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. My daughter needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Now I was questioning that decision. Not because I regretted helping Lindsay, but because I'd been naive about Bradley's character. I'd trusted him because she loved him, and that had been my mistake. The first few days at the hotel blurred together. I'd wake up early out of habit, then remember I had nowhere to be, no breakfast to cook for Lindsay before her shift. No yard to maintain or small repairs to tackle around the house. No purpose beyond figuring out how to restart my life at 58. I spent hours walking around town, killing time, past my old school, now closed for summer break, past the house where I'd raised Lindsay after her mother died, past the cemetery where both my wife and daughter now rested. On the fourth day, I found myself at the local library, using their computers to search for housing. That's where I ran into Margaret Wells, who taught English at the high school during my last few years there, Gordon Hayes. She called out, walking over with a smile that faded when she saw my expression. I heard about Lindsay. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Margaret. She was a good kid. The best. She used to volunteer here during high school, remember? Always helping with the reading program for elementary kids. Margaret's eyes were kind behind her glasses. How are you holding up? I almost gave her the standard answer, fine. Taking it day by day, all the things people say when they don't want to burden others with the truth. Instead, I found myself telling her about Bradley, about being thrown out, about living at the Hampton Inn while I searched for a place I could afford. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail. That's horrible, Gordon. After everything you've been through, to be treated like that by family. She shook her head. Do you have any legal recourse? For what? It was his house, too. Legally, he had every right to ask me to leave, but morally, morals don't hold up in court. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You know, my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, just moved to Florida to be near her grandkids. She's been looking for someone reliable to rent her garage apartment. It's small, but it's clean and affordable. Would you like me to give her a call? Hope flickered in my chest. I'd appreciate that very much. Margaret made the call right there in the library. Mrs. Patterson remembered me from school events over the years and was willing to meet that afternoon. By 5 p.m., I'd seen the apartment, a converted garage behind a modest ranch house with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough space for my few belongings. The rent was reasonable within my budget, and Mrs. Patterson said I could move in immediately. For the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe. That evening, back at the hotel, I was packing my things when the phone rang. I expected it to be Mrs. Patterson with some detail about the lease, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Hayes, this is Nathan Pierce from Pearson Associates. I handled your daughter's legal affairs. My heart skipped. Yes, Mr. Pierce. I remember meeting you at Lindsay and Bradley's house closing. I'm calling to inform you that the probate process is complete, and there will be a formal reading of Lindsay's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in my office. Your presence is required. My presence was required. I sat up straighter, ignoring the way the cheap mattress springs protested. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. Bradley seemed to think, Mr. Hayes. Pierce interrupted gently. I can only tell you what Lindsay's will specifies, and it specifically names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. After he hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. Lindsay had left me something after all. Probably some small keepsake, maybe her grandmother's jewelry or the photo albums from her childhood. Bradley wouldn't be happy about it, but he'd have to live with whatever Lindsay had decided. I called Mrs. Patterson and arranged to move into the apartment over the weekend. Whatever Lindsay had left me, I wanted to be settled in my own place before facing Bradley again. Saturday morning, I loaded my truck one more time and drove to my new home. The garage apartment was small but clean, with windows that looked out over a well-maintained garden. Mrs. Patterson had left some basic furniture, a bed, a table and chairs, a comfortable reading chair by the window. As I unpacked my few belongings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. It was temporary. I knew that. Tuesday's will reading would stir things up again, but for now I had a place to call my own, and that was enough. Sunday evening, I was sitting in my new reading chair when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost didn't check it, thinking it might be some spam, but curiosity got the better of me. Gordon, this is Bradley. I heard you found a place. Good for you. See you Tuesday at the lawyer's office. The casualness of it irritated me more than outright hostility would have, like we were old friends catching up instead of a man who'd thrown me out of my home addressing the father of his dead wife. I didn't respond. Monday dragged by slowly. I spent the morning setting up my small apartment, finding places for my books and tools. Mrs. Patterson stopped by in the afternoon with fresh tomatoes from her garden and an offer to help with anything I needed. She was a kind woman, probably in her early 70s, whose own children lived far away. "I'm glad to have someone responsible here," she said, settling into my single kitchen chair while I made us coffee. The last tenant was a young man who played music too loud and left the place a mess when he moved out. Well, at my age, the wildest I get is staying up past 9 p.m. to watch the news. She laughed. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. We talked for an hour about the neighborhood, the best places to shop, the local handyman who helped her with repairs she couldn't manage herself. It felt good to have a normal conversation with someone who wasn't grieving or angry or scheming. After she left, I tried to read, but my mind kept drifting to Tuesday's appointment. What could Lindsay have left me? We'd never discussed wills or inheritance. She was young, healthy, planning for a long life with Bradley. The idea that she'd made specific provisions for me seemed unlikely. Maybe it was something sentimental? Her grandmother's ring, perhaps, or the photo albums from her childhood. Bradley wouldn't care about those things. They had no monetary value, just memories.
Thanks, Dad.
But then I remembered Pierce's exact words, specifically names you as a beneficiary that sounded more formal than a simple keepsake. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly. I dressed in my best clothes, navy slacks, and a white button-down shirt I'd worn to Lindsay's funeral. I wanted to look respectable, whatever happened at the reading. At 1:45 p.m., I sat in the parking lot of Pierce & Associates, watching Bradley emerge from a silver BMW wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly budget. He'd brought someone with him, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. When I walked into the reception area, Bradley's face darkened. "What is he doing here?" he demanded of the receptionist. "Mr. Hayes is here for the will reading," the young woman replied professionally. "Which Mr. Hayes?" Bradley's voice rose slightly. "Both of you, apparently." The man in the expensive suit, who I now recognized as Bradley's brother Kevin, leaned over to whisper something in Bradley's ear. He nodded curtly and took a seat across the waiting room from me, making it clear that whatever temporary civility might have existed between us was officially over. I picked up a magazine and pretended to read, but I was watching Bradley out of the corner of my eye. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his phone, checking the time repeatedly. Kevin looked calm, taking notes on a legal pad like he was preparing for a business meeting. Pierce appeared promptly at 2 p.m. and ushered us into his office. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who probably still believed in doing right by his clients. "Gentlemen," he began, settling behind his mahogany desk. "I know this is a difficult time, but Lindsay was very specific about her wishes. I'll read the will in its entirety, and then we can discuss any questions." The office was quiet, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the bookshelf. Outside, the rain had picked up, pattering against the windows. I found myself thinking about Lindsay, wondering if she'd ever sat in this same chair, making decisions about her future that she never got to see. Bradley sat forward eagerly, his hands clasped in his lap. Kevin had pulled out a legal pad and was preparing to take notes. I simply folded my hands and waited. Pierce put on his reading glasses and opened a thick folder. "This is the last will and testament of Lindsay Marie Hayes Collins, dated January 15th of this year." January 15th, that was only 4 months ago. Why had Lindsay updated her will so recently? "I'll begin with the standard provisions," Pierce continued. "To my husband, Bradley Michael Collins, I leave our marital home at 1247 Maple Street, including all furnishings and personal property contained therein. I also leave him my 2019 Honda Accord, my retirement account through Mercy General Hospital, and my life insurance policy through the hospital's group plan. Bradley nodded approvingly at each item. The house was worth about $300,000. The life insurance policy was for $150,000. Her retirement account probably had another $75,000. He was getting a substantial inheritance. I also leave to my husband my personal checking and savings accounts at First National Bank. Pierce continued reading, more nodding from Bradley. I could see him calculating numbers in his head, adding up his windfall. Then Pierce's voice changed slightly, and I knew we were approaching something important. There is, however, one final provision that Lindsay added to this will on the same date, January 15th. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Bradley stopped nodding and leaned forward, his eyes sharp with sudden attention. Kevin put down his pen, and I found myself holding my breath. Pierce cleared his throat and continued reading. To my father, Gordon Hayes, who provided the down payment for our home and has never asked for repayment, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box 1247 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information contained therein. What safety deposit box? Bradley's voice was sharp. Lindsay never mentioned a safety deposit box. Pierce looked up from the document. Apparently it was something she maintained privately. She was quite specific that the contents should go to her father. I was as surprised as Bradley, but for different reasons. Lindsay had never mentioned a safety deposit box to me either. What could she possibly have put there that was meant for me? What's in it? Kevin asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. I have no idea, Pierce replied honestly. Lindsay simply provided the bank information and instructions that Mr. Hayes should have full access upon her death. Bradley's face was flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. If there's anything of value in that box, it should be part of the estate. We need to contest this. You're certainly free to try, Pierce said mildly. But the provision is very clear, and Lindsay was completely competent when she added it to her will. I witnessed the document myself. When exactly did she add this provision? I asked quietly. Pierce consulted his notes. January 15th. She came in specifically to make this addition January 15th. I remembered that date clearly because it was the day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we'd had a family dinner. Lindsay had seemed unusually quiet throughout the meal. Bradley had been complaining about something, the neighbor's dog barking, I think, and Lindsay had barely spoken. I'd noticed she seemed troubled, but when I asked if everything was okay, she just smiled and said she was tired from a long shift at the hospital. Now I wondered if there was more to it. This is a waste of time, Bradley snapped, standing abruptly. Kevin, let's go. We'll file a challenge tomorrow. Actually, Pierce said, pulling out another document before you leave, I need to inform you both that Lindsay left specific instructions for her father regarding the contents of the safety deposit box. He handed me a sealed envelope. Mr. Hayes, she wanted you to access it within the next few days. These are the bank documents and her personal key. The bank will need to verify the death certificate and process the paperwork before you can access the box. Usually takes about 3 business days. Bradley's eyes fixed on the envelope in my hands like a hawk watching a mouse. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out what Lindsay might have hidden away on coming with you to the bank. I'm afraid that's not possible, Pierce interjected. The safety deposit box access is restricted to Mr. Gordon Hayes only. Bank policy. This is insane. Bradley sputtered. How do we even know there's anything valuable in there? It could be empty or just sentimental junk. I stood up, clutching the envelope. I suppose we'll find out next week. As we filed out of the office, I could feel Bradley's eyes boring into my back. The rain had stopped, but the parking lot was still wet, reflecting the gray sky above. In the parking lot, Bradley cornered me beside my truck. Gordon, let's be reasonable about this. Whatever's in that box, we should share it. Lindsay would have wanted her husband to benefit from anything she left behind. For the first time since Lindsay's death, I almost smiled. You made it very clear that you don't believe Lindsay would have left me anything. Now suddenly you're concerned about sharing. I'm just saying, you're saying whatever you think will get you access to that safety deposit box. I unlocked my truck door, but Bradley grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, almost threatening. Don't forget, Gordon, you're living in some garage apartment now. You need my goodwill more than I need yours. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Actually, Bradley, I don't think I need anything from you at all. He released my arm, but his eyes remained hard. We'll see about that. I drove home slowly, my mind racing. What had Lindsay put in that safety deposit box, and why had she been so secretive about it? She'd always been close to me, especially after her mother died. We talked about everything. Her work at the hospital, her plans for the future, even her frustrations with Bradley when he spent too much money or forgot to help with household chores. But a safety deposit box that suggested something more serious than sentimental keepsakes. Back at my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table and examined the envelope Pierce had given me. It was sealed with Lindsay's neat handwriting on the front. For Dad, safety deposit box access documents. Inside were bank forms, a small brass key, and a business card for someone named Mrs. Patterson at First National Bank. Not the same Mrs. Patterson who was my landlord. This was apparently the bank manager who would help me access the box. I called the number on the business card and reached an automated system. After navigating through several menu options, I finally reached a real person. First National Bank, this is Mrs. Patterson. Hello, this is Gordon Hayes. I believe my daughter Lindsay Collins had a safety deposit box with your bank and I need to arrange access. Yes, Mr. Hayes, I've been expecting your call. I worked with Lindsay to set up the access provisions. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon? I'll need to verify the death certificate and complete some paperwork before you can access the box. What time works for you? How about 2 p.m.? And Mr. Hayes, Lindsay spoke of you often. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. That night, I lay in my new bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain start up again outside my window. Somewhere in a bank vault downtown, Lindsay had left something for me, something important enough that she'd gone to the trouble of setting up special access provisions, something she'd felt was important enough to hide from her husband. Wednesday crawled by. I tried to keep busy, organizing my small apartment, reading, even walking around the neighborhood to familiarize myself with my new surroundings. But my mind kept drifting to that safety deposit box. Mrs. Patterson, my landlord, knocked on my door around noon with a plate of homemade cookies and an invitation to join her for lunch. Her kitchen was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of a radio playing soft jazz. You seem restless today, she observed as we ate sandwiches at her kitchen table. I have some business to take care of this afternoon. My daughter left me something, and I'm not sure what to expect. Sometimes the people we love surprise us, even after they're gone. I thought about that as I drove to the bank. Lindsay had always been thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who brought soup when someone was sick. But this felt different. This felt like planning. First National Bank was a solid brick building in the older part of downtown, the kind of place that had been serving the community for generations. Mrs. Patterson met me in the lobby, a professional woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming in. I have all the paperwork ready. If you'll follow me. We walked through the main banking floor to a secured area behind thick glass doors. Mrs. Patterson used her key card to get us through, and we entered a quiet hallway lined with offices. Lindsay spoke of you often when she came in. Mrs. Patterson said as we walked, she was very proud of you. Said you taught her everything she knew about fixing things and standing up for herself. She was a special kid. Woman, I should say. It's hard to think of her as grown up. She rented the safety deposit box about 3 years ago and visited regularly, usually once a month. She was always very focused during her visits, very deliberate about what she was doing. 3 years ago. That would have been shortly after I moved in with Lindsay and Bradley. What had she been planning for 3 years? We reached the vault area, a secure room lined with safety deposit boxes of various sizes. Mrs. Patterson consulted her records and led me to box 12047, the same number as the house address. I noticed. Box 1247 is one of our larger units, she explained as we approached the wall of metal boxes. Your daughter was quite specific about wanting adequate space. She used her master key while I inserted Lindsay's key and the box slid out smoothly. It was indeed large, about the size of a briefcase, and surprisingly heavy. Take all the time you need, Mrs. Patterson said, showing me to a private viewing room. I'll be at my desk when you're finished. Just press the call button if you need anything. Alone in the small windowless room, I lifted the lid of the safety deposit box with trembling hands. The first thing I saw was a letter addressed to me in Lindsay's familiar handwriting. My heart pounded as I opened it. Dad, it began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Bradley has probably shown you exactly who he really is. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not surprised. I've known for years what kind of person I married, and I've been preparing for this possibility. My breath caught in my throat. Lindsay had known. She'd known what Bradley was capable of. You gave us $40,000 for our house down payment. I know you thought of it as a loan even though you never asked for repayment. I've been investing that money for the past 3 years, adding to it whenever possible. The money in the accompanying accounts isn't just repayment. It's what careful investing has grown into. I set the letter down with shaking hands and looked at the documents underneath. Bank statements, investment portfolios, account numbers. My eyes scanned the balance sheets, trying to make sense of the numbers. 18,500 in various investment accounts, all in my name, all accessible with proper documentation. I picked up Lindsay's letter again, hardly believing what I was reading. I also discovered that Bradley has been telling people you contribute nothing to our household. What he doesn't mention is that our mortgage has been automatically paid from both our salaries for the entire time you've lived with us. Any money you've given us for expenses went straight into investments for your future. The letter continued. I've been documenting everything, Dad. Every email, every text, every casual comment he's made about you. It's all in the folder labeled documentation. I thought you should know what kind of person has been living in our house. My vision blurred as I reached for the folder she'd mentioned. Inside were printed emails, text message, screenshots, even photographs of credit card statements, evidence of years of manipulation and deceit. One email thread between Bradley and Kevin from 8 months ago made my blood boil. The old man is getting too comfortable here. We need to start setting boundaries about what happens when Lindsay's gone. I'm not running a nursing home. Another text conversation between Bradley and someone named Ryan Martinez. Gordon acts like he owns the place just because he helped with the down payment 3 years ago. Dude doesn't realize that was basically rent for living here. Can't wait until he's gone and we can turn his room into my home office. There were dozens more. Screenshots of Bradley complaining to friends about having to deal with me. Emails to Kevin about strategies for making me feel unwelcome. Even a particularly cruel message where Bradley laughed about how pathetic it was that I had nowhere else to go. All of it carefully documented by my daughter, who'd been watching and recording while pretending everything was fine. The final paragraph of Lindsay's letter made my eyes fill with tears. You deserve so much better than the way he's treated you. Take this money and build yourself a life where no one can make you feel unwanted ever again. And Dad, don't tell Bradley about any of this until you're safely established somewhere else. Trust me on this one. All my love, Lindsay. I sat in that little room for nearly 2 hours, reading through everything Lindsay had left for me. By the time I emerged, I had a clear picture of exactly how my son-in-law had been manipulating both of us for years. The evidence was overwhelming. Bradley hadn't just been casually cruel, he'd been systematically working to undermine my relationship with Lindsay while presenting himself as the patient, long-suffering husband dealing with an inconvenient in-law. One particularly damning email showed him complaining to Kevin about how I interfered with their marriage by cooking dinner most nights. The old man acts like he's doing us a favor, but Lindsay feels guilty eating takeout when he's made a meal. It's manipulative. Another document showed credit card statements that Lindsay had photographed. While Bradley was telling her they needed to be careful with money, he was spending hundreds of dollars a month on golf equipment, expensive lunches, and bar tabs with friends. But perhaps most revealing was a series of text messages between Bradley and Ryan Martinez from just 2 months before Lindsay's death. Bradley, Lindsay's been weird lately, asking questions about finances, wanting to see statements. Ryan, thinks she's onto you. Bradley, nah, just hormonal or something. She'll back off, Bradley. Besides, if anything happens to her, I inherit everything anyway. Gordon will be out on his ass within 24 hours. Reading those words, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the bank. Bradley had been planning my eviction before Lindsay was even gone. He'd been calculating cold, ready to throw me out at the first opportunity. Mrs. Patterson helped me transfer all the documents to a large envelope and explain the process for accessing the investment accounts. She was professional but kind, clearly understanding that this was an emotional moment. Your daughter was very thorough, she said as we walked back through the bank. She came in every month to review the account statements, make additional investments when she could. She mentioned several times that she wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I had no idea she was doing any of this. She said you were the kind of man who would never ask for help, even when you needed it. She wanted to make sure you never had to. As I walked to my truck, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Bradley's number, Gordon. His voice was falsely sweet. I was wondering if you'd like to come by for lunch today. We could discuss what you found in the safety deposit box. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. Here I was, holding evidence of years of his deception, and he was calling to try to manipulate me some more. I smiled grimly at my reflection in the truck window. That's very generous, Bradley. I'll be there at noon. It was time for Bradley to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you most. I drove home first to drop off the documents and think through my strategy. Lindsay had been right to warn me about revealing everything too soon. I needed to be smart about this, not emotional. I called Mrs. Patterson to let her know I'd be out for a few hours, then selected a few key pieces of evidence to take with me. Not everything. I didn't want to overwhelm Bradley or give him a chance to deny or deflect, just enough to make my point. I arrived at Bradley's house, the house that should have been Lindsay's house that I'd helped them buy at exactly noon. He answered the door in a crisp white button-down and khakis, all smiles and false warmth. "Gordon, I'm so glad you came. I've made your favorite pulled pork sandwiches." Funny how he remembered my favorite foods now that he wanted something from me. The dining room table was set with Lindsay's good china and fresh flowers. Bradley had clearly put effort into this performance. He poured sweet tea and chattered about the weather while I sat quietly, watching him work up to what he really wanted to discuss. The house felt different somehow. Emptier. I noticed that more photographs had disappeared, not just the ones of me, but several of Lindsay as well. The mantle that used to display a dozen family photos now held only 3. Their wedding picture, a photo of Lindsay in her nursing uniform, and one of Bradley with his golf buddies. So he finally said, settling into his chair with practiced grace, "I've been thinking about yesterday, about the safety deposit box. Have you?" I sipped my tea calmly. "I have. I know we've had our differences, but Lindsay would want us to support each other through this difficult time. Family should stick together. Family." Rich coming from the man who'd thrown me out the day after his wife's funeral, I couldn't agree more, I said evenly. Bradley's eyes lit up, clearly thinking he'd found an opening. "I'm so relieved to hear you say that. I was worried you might be angry about having to find your own place so quickly, but you understand I needed space to grieve." Of course I took a bite of sandwich. Grief affects everyone differently. Exactly. He leaned forward eagerly. "So about what Lindsay left you, I was thinking we could pool our resources, combine whatever was in that box with Lindsay's life insurance. Maybe invest it together. I have some wonderful financial advisors." I bet he did. The same ones who'd been helping him make questionable spending decisions with Lindsay's money while telling her they needed to cut back on expenses. "That's very thoughtful, Bradley, but I'm curious. What makes you think there was anything valuable in the safety deposit box?" He paused, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, Lindsay was always so private about certain financial matters. She must have had a reason for keeping something separate." "Private? That's an interesting choice of words, you know what I mean?" He waved a hand dismissively. "Women in their financial planning, they never tell us men everything." I set down my sandwich and looked directly at him. "Actually, Bradley, I think Lindsay told you exactly as much as she thought you needed to know." Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe a hint of fear. "What did you find in the box, Gordon?" The moment of truth was approaching, but I wasn't quite ready to play that card yet. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I brought you something," I said. "A little thank you gift." He unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a framed photograph of Lindsay from her nursing school graduation. His face softened slightly as he looked at the picture. "Oh, Gordon, this is lovely, thank you, I thought you should have it. After all, you were such a devoted husband." The emphasis I placed on devoted wasn't lost on him. He looked up sharply, searching my face for hidden meaning. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all. I'm just appreciating how well you took care of my daughter." Bradley set the photograph down carefully, his demeanor shifting. The fake sweetness was evaporating, replaced by something warier. "Gordon, you're being cryptic. Just tell me what was in the safety deposit box." I smiled and took another sip of tea. "Documents mostly, very interesting reading material." "What kind of documents?" "Oh, you know? Financial records, investment statements, some correspondence." I paused meaningfully. Quite a few printed emails and text messages. The color drained from Bradley's face. Text messages. Lindsay was quite thorough in her record keeping, especially toward the end. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of various documents. "Would you like to see one?" This is from about 8 months ago. I turned the screen toward him, showing a screenshot of him texting Kevin. "Can't wait until the old man finally moves out. Then we can turn his room into the home office I've been wanting." Bradley lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back smoothly. "There are dozens more," I said conversationally. Lindsay was apparently very good at documentation. This next one is particularly enlightening. It's you texting Ryan Martinez about how you've been convincing Lindsay that I should contribute to household expenses when the mortgage was already budgeted from both your salaries. Stop. Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. And then there's the email where you're laughing with Kevin about how gullible I am, how easy it was to make me feel like a burden when you'd already planned to kick me out after Lindsay's death. I set the phone down and looked at him with what I hoped was mild curiosity. That was forward thinking of you. Planning my eviction while Lindsay was still alive. Bradley's composure finally cracked completely. She had no right to save private messages. Actually, she had every right. It was her house too, and you were discussing her father. I leaned back in my chair. The question is, what are we going to do about this situation? What do you want? The mask was completely off now, revealing the calculating man underneath. Want? I don't want anything from you, Bradley. I never did. Then why are you doing this? What's the point of humiliating me? I considered the question seriously. You know, you're right. There's no point in humiliating you. You've done that perfectly well yourself. I don't understand. You threw me out of my home the day after my daughter's funeral. You told me I was worthless, that Lindsay felt sorry for me, that I'd contributed nothing to your household. I stood up slowly, but here's what you didn't understand about Lindsay. She saw everything, every cruel comment, every manipulation, every lie you told. Bradley was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. And you want to know the really beautiful part? I continued. She documented all of it, not to hurt you, but to protect me, because she knew that once she was gone, you'd show your true colors. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court. Court, I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. Oh, son, I'm not taking you to court. Bradley blinked, clearly confused by my response. You're not? Why would I? You've already given me everything I need. I don't understand what you're talking about. I pulled out a folder from Lindsay's collection and placed it on the table between us. Lindsay left me more than just text screenshots, Bradley. She left me 3 years worth of evidence showing exactly how you've been manipulating both of us. He stared at the folder like it might bite him. Bank statements showing that the house payments have been automatically deducted from both your salaries for the entire time I've been living here. Email chains between you and Kevin discussing how to handle the Gordon situation. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases made on the same days you told Lindsay we couldn't afford basic household repairs. Bradley's breathing was becoming shallow. I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Lindsay saved all of that. Lindsay documented everything, including copies of the emails you sent to your friends, calling her a pushover and joking about how easy it was to manipulate her into thinking I was a financial burden. That hit home. Bradley flinched as if I'd slapped him. You want to know what I found most interesting? I continued, opening the folder. This email thread where you and Kevin discuss your long-term plans to convince Lindsay that I should move to a nursing home so you could have the house to yourselves. That's not. We never actually know. You never actually followed through. Know why? Because Lindsay figured out what you were planning and took steps to protect me. Bradley's eyes widened. What steps? You don't have anything worth protecting, do I? I smiled pleasantly. That's interesting because according to these investment statements, I apparently have quite a bit worth protecting. Money that Lindsay had been carefully growing for the past 3 years. That's impossible. You're living in some garage apartment. I'm living in a garage apartment because I choose to be there while I figure out my next move, not because I can't afford better. The silence stretched between us as Bradley processed this information. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head trying to calculate how much money we might be talking about. How much, he finally asked. Excuse me, how much money did Lindsay leave you? I closed the folder and stood up. That's really none of your business, is it? I'm her husband, I have a right to know. You had a right to know what your wife left you, which as I recall was quite generous. The house, the cars, the life insurance, her retirement accounts. I'd say you made out very well. Bradley shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You manipulative old fool. You're trying to steal what's rightfully mine? Steal? I raised an eyebrow. How exactly would I be stealing anything? Everything I have was given to me by my daughter, who had every legal right to dispose of her assets as she saw fit. She was my wife. Yes, she was. And apparently, she knew exactly what kind of husband you were. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Bradley's face was flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. I want to see those bank statements, he demanded. I'm sure you do. Gordon, I'm warning you. You're warning me. I laughed again, feeling oddly liberated. Bradley, son, you threw me out of your house. You humiliated me at my daughter's funeral. You made it clear that you consider me worthless and unwanted. What exactly do you think you can threaten me with now? Bradley stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him recalibrating. The threats weren't working, so he was switching tactics. Gordon, please, let's be reasonable about this. His voice took on a pleading tone. I know I've been difficult since Lindsay died. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we're family. We should work together. Family, I repeated thoughtfully. Yes, you mentioned that before. Right after you told me Lindsay felt sorry for me and that I'd never contributed anything to your household, I didn't mean that. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean them. That's what makes Lindsay's documentation so valuable. She saved you saying the same things multiple times to multiple people over a period of years. Bradley's mask slipped again. What do you want from me, Gordon? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I asked you to leave. I'm sorry for everything. Now, can we please discuss this money situation like adults? There's nothing to discuss. Of course there is. If Lindsay left you a significant amount of money, we need to plan how to manage it responsibly. I know excellent financial advisors.
And
I could help you
how is
invest
that
it
new
properly.
project
You mean you could help me
coming
spend it
along?
properly?
It's
That's not what I said.
challenging,
It's what you
but I
meant. I
think
picked up
we're
my truck
making good
keys.
progress.
Bradley, let me be
That's
very clear about
wonderful to
something.
hear.
The money
Are
Lindsay
you
left me
staying for
isn't an
dinner?
inheritance that fell into my lap. It's the return on the $40,000 I gave you for your house down payment, plus 3 years of careful investment. His mouth fell open. $40,000? But I thought, did you think it was a gift? Did you think I just handed over my life savings out of the goodness of my heart with no expectation of repayment? Lindsay said it was a family contribution. Lindsay was trying to preserve your pride and mine, but she never forgot it was a loan. I could see his mind racing, trying to process this new information. If you'd invested $40,000 3 years ago, and Lindsay had been growing it, he swallowed hard. How much is it worth now? I pulled out my phone and opened one of the banking apps the bank had helped me set up. The account balance filled the screen and I turned it toward him, $185,000. Bradley's face went white. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, his legs suddenly unsteady. That's impossible. Lindsay was a careful investor, and apparently she was very motivated to make sure her father was taken care of. But that's almost as much as the life insurance policy. Yes, it is. That money should be part of the estate. It should be split between us. Should it? Based on what legal principle? Based on the fact that I'm her husband and you're just her father. The casual cruelty in those words, just her father, hit me like a physical blow. But instead of pain, I felt something else. Clarity. You know what, Bradley? You're absolutely right. I'm just her father. The man who raised her, supported her through nursing school, and lent her the down payment for the house where you threw me out like garbage. I stood up and headed toward the door. And apparently that was enough for Lindsay to make sure I'd never have to depend on anyone's charity again. Wait, Bradley called as I reached the doorway. Gordon, wait, we can work this out. Please, just sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. I paused and turned back to face him. What exactly do you think we need to work out? The money situation, our relationship, everything. He was speaking quickly now, panic making his voice tight. Look, I know I made mistakes. I was stressed about Lindsay's death, worried about finances, and I took it out on you. But we can fix this. I'm sure you were worried about finances, I said quietly, but not for the reasons you're claiming. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out one more document from Lindsay's folder, one I'd been saving for last. It means Lindsay also documented your spending habits, Bradley, including the $12,000 you charged to credit cards in the month before she died. His face went ashen. New golf clubs, a weekend in Vegas with Kevin, a down payment on that BMW outside, all while telling Lindsay you were worried about money for groceries. That's not, I wasn't, you weren't what? Planning to live off her life insurance while throwing out the inconvenient father-in-law who might interfere with your lifestyle? Bradley collapsed back into his chair, the fight going out of him. You don't understand the pressure I was under. What pressure? Everyone expected me to be the perfect husband, the perfect provider. Lindsay's colleagues, the neighbors, my family. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to maintain appearances? I looked at him sitting there in his designer clothes, in his beautiful house, surrounded by luxury, complaining about the burden of appearances. No, Bradley, I don't, because I was too busy actually taking care of your wife while you were busy spending her money. I loved Lindsay. You loved what Lindsay could provide for you. There's a difference. He was crying now. Ugly tears that smeared his carefully maintained composure. I can't lose everything. I can't go back to being nobody. You're not nobody, Bradley. You're Lindsay's widower. You inherited a $300,000 house, a $150,000 life insurance policy, and her retirement accounts. You're financially set for life if you manage it properly, but it's not enough for the life I planned. Then maybe you planned the wrong life. I walked toward the door again, and this time he didn't try to stop me with words. Instead, there was a soft thud behind me. I turned to see Bradley slumped forward in his chair, his face gray, his breathing shallow. For a moment, I thought he might actually be having a medical emergency. Then I realized what I was seeing: complete defeat. The moment when someone realizes they've lost everything they thought they were entitled to, and there's no manipulation or charm or cruelty that can get it back. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't lose everything." "You're not losing everything, Bradley. You're losing the things that never belonged to you in the first place." I left him there in his expensive dining room, surrounded by Lindsay's good china and his carefully constructed life, and walked out into the sunshine of my new beginning. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to think. Bradley's reaction had been everything I'd expected and more. The panic in his eyes when he realized I had documented proof of his deception. The desperate attempt to negotiate for a share of money that was rightfully mine. The complete breakdown when he understood that his carefully planned future was crumbling. But what struck me most was his inability to understand what he'd lost. Not just the money, though, that clearly mattered to him, but the respect and trust of the only family he had left. He'd destroyed our relationship for short-term convenience, never considering the long-term consequences. Back at my apartment, I called Mrs. Patterson at the bank to set up appointments for accessing the investment accounts Lindsay had established. The process would take a few days, but soon I'd have access to funds that would secure my future. That evening, I sat in my reading chair by the window, looking out at the small garden Mrs. Patterson maintained behind her house. For the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching peace. Not happiness. I was still grieving Lindsay, still processing the magnitude of Bradley's betrayal, but a sense that justice had been served. My phone rang around 8 p.m. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer. "Mr. Hayes, this is Kevin Collins, Bradley's brother. I think we need to talk." "Do we?" "Bradley told me about your conversation today, about the documents Lindsay left. Look, I know my brother hasn't handled this well, but maybe we can work something out." I almost laughed. What kind of something? Bradley's willing to apologize publicly, make things right between you, maybe help you find a better living situation, in exchange for, well, a reasonable split of whatever Lindsay left you. A reasonable split, 50-50 seems fair. You get your original investment back plus some profit. Bradley gets enough to maintain the lifestyle Lindsay would have wanted for him. "And what makes you think I'm interested in negotiating?" There was a pause. "Mr. Hayes, Bradley is family. Whatever his faults, he loved Lindsay. She would want us to work together." "Kevin, let me ask you something. Were you aware that your brother was planning to evict me before Lindsay was even dead?" Another pause, longer this time. "I think there might be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I have the text messages. Your brother was planning my homelessness while my daughter was still alive, while she was working extra shifts to pay for the very house he was planning to throw me out of." Look, maybe Bradley said some things in anger. 3 years worth of things, Kevin. Documented, dated, saved by my daughter, who saw exactly what kind of man she'd married. I could hear Kevin breathing on the other end of the line, probably calculating his next approach. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you're upset, but think about this practically. Legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. Wouldn't it be better to settle this amicably?" "There's nothing to settle, Kevin. Lindsay left me money that was rightfully mine, to begin with. Your brother inherited everything else. The only reason we're having this conversation is because Bradley can't accept that his manipulation didn't work. What if we offered you 60%? That's more than generous. Kevin, you're missing the point. This isn't about negotiating percentages. This is about your brother's character. He threw me out of my home the day after my daughter's funeral. He told me I was worthless. He made it clear he considered me a burden that Lindsay felt sorry for. People say things in grief, not just in grief. For 3 years, to multiple people, in writing. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the peaceful garden. "Kevin, I appreciate that you're trying to help your brother, but there's nothing to discuss. Mr. Hayes, please, Bradley made mistakes, but he's not a bad person. He's just young, immature. He can learn from this. He's 32 years old, Kevin. That's old enough to know better." There was a long silence on the line. Finally, Kevin spoke again, his tone shifting. "What if I told you Bradley's in financial trouble, that he needs this money? Then I'd say he should have thought of that before he decided to treat me like garbage. He's going to lose the house." I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. How is that possible? He inherited a house with a manageable mortgage and substantial life insurance. Credit cards, loans. Bradley's been living beyond his means for years. The life insurance will pay off some of it, but not all, without additional income. So Lindsay had been right. Bradley had been accumulating debt while telling her they needed to be careful with money. The evidence in her safety deposit box was just the tip of the iceberg. Kevin, that's not my problem to solve, but you could help. You could save him. Why would I want to do that? Because Lindsay loved him. Because family helps family. Family helps family, I repeated slowly. Is that what Bradley was doing when he threw me out? When he humiliated me at my daughter's funeral? When he spent years telling people I was a worthless burden? Kevin didn't answer. Here's what I think happened, Kevin. Your brother married my daughter for her stability, her income, her character. He saw a good woman with a decent job and a father who owned property. He calculated that marrying her would set him up nicely. That's not true. Then he discovered that her father came with the package. That I wasn't just going away after writing a check, and instead of being grateful for my help around the house, my companionship for Lindsay when she worked long shifts, my contributions to their household, he saw me as an obstacle to his perfect life. I could hear Kevin moving around on his end of the call, probably pacing, so he started poisoning the well. I continued, making comments about how I was in the way, how I was taking advantage, how Lindsay felt sorry for me, building a narrative that would justify getting rid of me when the opportunity came. You're being paranoid. Am I then? Why did your brother have a plan ready to go the moment Lindsay died? Why was I out of the house within 24 hours? You don't execute something that quickly unless you've been thinking about it for a long time. Kevin was quiet for several minutes. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. Bradley's scared, Mr. Hayes. He's made mistakes, and now he's scared. I'm sure he is. Isn't there anything we can do? Any way to work this out? I thought about Lindsay, about the hours she'd spent carefully documenting Bradley's behavior, about the investment accounts she'd built in secret, knowing that someday I might need protection from the man she'd married. Kevin, your brother had 3 years to treat me with basic human decency. 3 years to show gratitude for the help I provided. 3 years to build a relationship with the only family Lindsay had left. I know, but instead he spent those 3 years planning my removal, documenting my supposed worthlessness, calculating how to get rid of me the moment Lindsay couldn't protect me anymore. I walked back to my chair and sat down, feeling suddenly tired. So no, Kevin, there's nothing to work out. Your brother made his choices. Now he gets to live with the consequences. What if he apologizes, publicly makes amends? For what? For 3 years of systematic emotional abuse? For throwing out a grieving father? For trying to steal money that was never his to begin with? People can change, Mr. Hayes. Some people can. But change requires acknowledging what you did wrong and why you did it. Bradley's not there yet. He's still trying to negotiate his way out of consequences instead of facing what he's done. Give him a chance. I did. I gave him 3 years of chances. Every day I lived in that house was a chance for him to be decent. Every meal I cooked was a chance for gratitude. Every repair I made was a chance for respect. Kevin was quiet again. He threw all those chances away, Kevin. And now you want me to give him more? Lindsay would want... Don't... My voice was sharper than I intended. Don't tell me what Lindsay would want. Lindsay left me very specific instructions about how to handle your brother. She knew exactly what kind of man he was, and she protected me from him the only way she could. The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear Kevin breathing, probably struggling with what to say next. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. I didn't realize. Bradley didn't tell me everything. No, I imagine he didn't. The text messages, the emails, are they really that bad? Kevin, your brother texted a friend 2 months before Lindsay died, joking about how I'd be out on my ass within 24 hours if anything happened to her. He was planning my homelessness while my daughter was still alive. I heard Kevin suck in a breath. He said that. He said a lot of things, all documented, all saved by Lindsay, who was apparently paying much closer attention than either of us realized. Jesus, your brother is who he is, Kevin. This isn't about grief or stress or immaturity. This is about character, and Lindsay knew exactly what his character was. Kevin was quiet for another minute. When he spoke, his voice was subdued. Is there really nothing? No way to make this right? Bradley had every opportunity to make it right, every day for 3 years. He chose not to. I understand. I'm sorry for bothering you, Kevin. Yes, your brother is going to try to blame me for his financial problem. He's going to tell people I'm stealing money that should be his. But you've heard the truth now. What you do with it is up to you. I understand, Mr. Hayes. And again, I'm sorry. After Kevin hung up, I sat in the quiet of my small apartment, processing the conversation. Bradley was in financial trouble. Part of me felt a flicker of concern, not for Bradley, but for what Lindsay would think about her husband losing everything so quickly after her death. Then I remembered the credit card statements she'd photographed, the evidence of his spending while telling her they needed to be careful. Bradley's financial problems weren't bad luck or poor planning. They were the predictable result of years of irresponsible behavior. Lindsay had seen it all, had documented it all, had protected me from it all. The next morning, I called Mrs. Patterson at the bank to check on the status of my account access. Everything was progressing normally, she said. I should have full access to the investment accounts by the end of the week. Mr. Hayes, can I ask you something? She said after we'd finished the business details, of course. Your daughter mentioned that she was worried about your future, about what would happen to you if something happened to her. I got the impression there was some family tension. There was. She was very smart about the investments. Conservative but growth-oriented. She said she wanted to make sure you'd never have to depend on anyone who didn't appreciate you.
I don't understand why you can't just trust
Those
me on
words hit me
this.
harder than I expected.
Sarah.
Lindsay
It's
had been
about
planning for my independence,
responsibility.
my security, my
The
dignity,
answer is
even while living
final.
with a man who was systematically undermining her relationship with me. She was a special person, I managed. Yes, she was. Mr. Hayes, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but she was very proud of you. She talked about how you'd raised her on your own, how you'd taught her to be independent and strong. She said you were the reason she became a nurse, because you'd shown her the importance of taking care of people. I had to clear my throat before I could respond. Thank you for telling me that. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Nathan Pierce, Lindsay's lawyer. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to give you a heads up. Bradley Collins has contacted my office about contesting Lindsay's will, specifically the safety deposit box provision, on what grounds? Undue influence, apparently. He's claiming that you
I have
manipulated Lindsay into
considered them,
changing her
Dad.
will to benefit you
It's
at his
just a
expense.
lot to
I almost
process
laughed.
right
That should be
now.
interesting to prove, considering I didn't know the safety deposit box existed until you told me about it. That's exactly what I told his attorney. Plus, we have documentation showing that Lindsay made all her own decisions about the investments. Bank records, meeting notes, her own handwritten instructions. It's very clear that she was acting independently. Will this delay my access to the accounts? It shouldn't. The will is very clear, and Bradley's inheritance isn't affected by the safety deposit box provision. His attorney knows it's a long shot, but they're required to explore all options. How long do these things usually take? In a case like this, with solid documentation? A few weeks, maybe a month. Bradley's attorney will probably drop it once they realize how much evidence we have of Lindsay's independent decision-making. That evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with another plate of vegetables from her garden and an invitation to join her for dinner. Her kitchen was becoming a refuge for me, a place where I could have normal conversations about everyday things. You seem more settled today, she observed as we ate her homemade soup and cornbread. I think I'm starting to accept my new normal. It takes time. When my husband died, I thought I'd never feel at home anywhere again. But eventually you build something new. How long did it take? About a year before I stopped feeling like I was just visiting my own life. She smiled, but then again, I didn't have anyone trying to contest my husband's will. I'd mentioned Bradley's legal challenge to her the day before, needing someone to talk through my frustration. Are you worried about it? Not really. Lindsay was thorough, but it's one more reminder of who I'm dealing with. Some people can't accept responsibility for their own choices. Mrs. Patterson said quietly, they always need someone else to blame. Friday morning brought the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Patterson at the bank informed me that all the paperwork was complete and I could access the investment accounts Lindsay had established. I drove to the bank feeling a mixture of anticipation and sadness. This money represented Lindsay's love and foresight, but it also represented years of living with a man who was planning to discard me at the first opportunity. The bank office was quiet and professional. Mrs. Patterson walked me through each account, explaining Lindsay's investment strategy and the growth she'd achieved over 3 years. She was remarkably disciplined, Mrs. Patterson said as we reviewed the statements. She never touched the principal, just kept adding to it when she could. Look here, she made additional deposits of $500 or $1,000 almost every month. I studied the deposit history. Regular contributions, always round numbers, always from Lindsay's personal checking account. While Bradley was spending money on golf clubs and weekend trips, Lindsay was quietly building my future security. She started with your initial $40,000 and grew it to $185,000 in 3 years. Mrs. Patterson continued. That's exceptional performance, especially for someone who was being conservative with the investments. How did she learn to invest like this? She took a personal finance course at the community college about 4 years ago, said she wanted to understand money better, be more independent. She was my youngest client to show that level of financial discipline. 4 years ago, that would have been shortly after she married Bradley. Had she already started to see warning signs? Mrs. Patterson helped me set up new account access and explain my options for managing the money going forward. I could keep the investments as they were, make changes, or move everything to different accounts. For now, I decided to leave things unchanged. Lindsay had done well with her choices. Walking out of the bank with complete access to $145,000 felt surreal. A week ago, I'd been living in a hotel room, worried about stretching my pension to cover basic expenses. Now I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the money wasn't the real gift. The real gift was knowing that Lindsay had seen what was happening and had protected me. She'd loved me enough to plan for my future, even while living with someone who was planning my downfall. That afternoon, my phone rang with another unknown number. I was tempted not to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Hayes, this is Sarah Mitchell. I work with Bradley Collins at Medical Supply Solutions. I wasn't sure why Bradley's coworker would be calling me, but I waited to hear what she had to say. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Lindsay's personnel file at the hospital. I wanted to express my condolences about Lindsay's death. Thank you. That's very kind, Mr. Hayes. I also wanted to tell you something. About Bradley. I don't think you know the whole story about how he's been talking about you at work. My stomach tightened. What kind of things he's been telling people, that you're trying to steal money that should belong to him, that you manipulated Lindsay into changing her will, that you're taking advantage of his grief. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung to hear it confirmed. I see, but Mr. Hayes, that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I know it's not true. How do you know that? Because Lindsay talked to me about you a lot. She was worried about what would happen to you if something happened to her. She knew Bradley didn't want you living with them, and she knew he'd throw you out if he got the chance. Sarah's voice was gentle but clear. Lindsay loved you very much, Mr. Hayes, and she was smart enough to plan ahead. She told me she'd been setting money aside for you, making sure you'd be okay no matter what Bradley did. Why are you telling me this? Because Bradley's been bad-mouthing you all over the office, and it's not right. Lindsay was one of the best nurses at Mercy General. She was smart and caring and honest. If she left you money, it's because you deserved it and needed it. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the money. There's something else, Mr. Hayes. Bradley's been bragging about the life insurance money, about how he's going to pay off his debts and start fresh. He's been acting like Lindsay's death was some kind of financial windfall. That was harder to hear. The idea of Bradley celebrating Lindsay's death for the money it brought him made me feel sick. I thought you should know what he's really saying when you're not around. Sarah continued, and I thought you should know that not everyone believes his version of events. I appreciate you calling, Sarah. It means more than you know. Lindsay talked about you all the time, about how you raised her by yourself, how you taught her to fix things and stand up for herself. She said you were the strongest person she knew. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at Bradley for continuing to smear my reputation. Sadness that Lindsay had been worried enough about my future to plan for it in secret, and gratitude that she'd had friends who saw through Bradley's manipulations. That evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with a newspaper tucked under her arm. "Have you seen the obituaries today?" she asked. "No, why?" "Someone named Bradley Collins placed a memorial notice for Lindsay. I thought you might want to see it." She handed me the paper, folded to the obituary page. There was Lindsay's photo, the one from her nursing school graduation, and below it, a memorial notice that made my blood boil. Lindsay Collins, beloved wife, devoted nurse, taken too soon. She will be remembered for her kindness, her dedication to helping others, and her generous spirit. In lieu of flowers, donations can be made to the American Heart Association. Arrangements by Bradley Collins. Not a single mention of me. Not a word about her father, who'd raised her, supported her, loved her. According to Bradley's memorial, Lindsay was a devoted wife, and that was all. That son of a Mrs. Patterson caught herself. "I'm sorry, Gordon. That's just wrong. It's exactly what I expected from him. You should place your own memorial. Tell the truth about who Lindsay was and who raised her." I considered it, but decided against it. Getting into a public battle with Bradley over Lindsay's memory felt wrong. She deserved better than that. Lindsay knows who loved her, I said finally. That's what matters. But privately, I was furious. Bradley's erasure of me from Lindsay's memorial was just another example of his selfishness. Even in death, he couldn't let Lindsay have a relationship with her father. Saturday morning, I was working in Mrs. Patterson's garden. She'd asked me to help with some repairs to her fence when a car pulled into her driveway. I looked up to see Kevin Collins getting out of a silver sedan. He walked over to where I was working, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I got your address from, well, it doesn't matter how. I wanted to talk to you in person." I set down my tools and studied Bradley's brother. He looked tired, older than when I'd seen him at the lawyer's office. "What's on your mind, Kevin? I owe you an apology. After we talked on the phone, I went through some of Bradley's things, found some papers he'd left at my house. Credit card statements, loan documents." Kevin ran a hand through his hair. I had no idea how bad his financial situation was, or how long he'd been lying about it. "What did you find?" "He owes almost $80,000 in credit card debt, has a personal loan for $25,000 that he took out 6 months ago, the BMW, he's 3 payments behind." I wasn't surprised, but I was curious about why Kevin was telling me this. "There's more," Kevin continued. "I found text messages on an old phone, messages between Bradley and Lindsay from about a year ago. She was asking him about charges on their credit cards. Expensive dinners, golf equipment, trips I didn't even know he'd taken. What was Bradley telling her? That it was work expenses that would be reimbursed, that he was investing in his career, building relationships with clients. All lies. Kevin sat down on Mrs. Patterson's porch steps looking defeated. Lindsay knew Mr. Hayes. She knew he was lying about money and spending behind her back. That's probably why she started the safety deposit box. Probably, I also found something else, a notebook where Bradley had written down his plans for after Lindsay died. Not if she died after, like he was planning for it. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of plans, how to handle the life insurance, which debts to pay off first, which assets to sell. And Kevin paused, looking uncomfortable. Plans for getting you out of the house quickly. I see there's a timeline, Mr. Hayes. Day 1, funeral. Day 2, evict Gordon. Day 3, list his room on Airbnb for extra income. The casual calculation of it took my breath away. Bradley hadn't just been cruel in the moment. He'd been planning my eviction in advance, down to the day. "Why are you telling me this?" Kevin looked up at me, his eyes tired and sad. "Because my brother isn't who I thought he was, and because you deserved better from our family." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the implications of what Kevin had found. "What's going to happen to Bradley?" I asked finally. "I don't know. He can't afford the house payments much longer. The life insurance will help, but it won't solve everything. He's talking about selling the house and moving to a smaller place. That might be the smart thing to do, maybe. But Mr. Hayes, I want you to know something. When Lindsay was alive, she used to call me sometimes. When Bradley and I would go out for drinks or golf, she'd call to check on him. Make sure he got home safely." Kevin's voice was quiet. "She told me once that she was worried about Bradley's spending, that he seemed to think money was unlimited. She said she was trying to teach him to be more responsible, but it was hard. Lindsay was always trying to help people, she was, and she was trying to protect you too. She asked me once if I thought Bradley would take care of you if something happened to her. I told her of course he would. That family takes care of family." Kevin's voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong about that, about a lot of things you couldn't have known. I should have paid more attention, should have seen the signs." Kevin stood up, brushing off his pants. "Mr. Hayes, I know this doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. For what Bradley did to you, for what our family put you through. I appreciate that, Kevin. Is there anything, any way I can help? Maybe with the legal challenge he's filed, actually there is something you can do." Kevin looked hopeful. "Your brother is telling people at work that I manipulated Lindsay into changing her will, that I'm stealing money that should be his. If you really want to help, you could set the record straight with people who know both of you. Of course, I'll make sure people know the truth. The truth is that Lindsay was protecting her father from a son-in-law who'd already planned to throw him out before she was cold in the ground." Kevin nodded slowly. "I'll make sure people understand." After he left, I sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch for a long time, thinking about families and loyalty and the different ways people show love. Lindsay had shown her love through careful planning and quiet protection. Kevin was showing his through acknowledgement and apology. Bradley had shown his true feelings through years of calculation and cruelty. Sunday was quiet. I spent the morning reading and the afternoon working on a small project for Mrs. Patterson, fixing a loose handrail on her back steps. The physical work felt good, productive. It reminded me that I still had skills, still had value beyond whatever money Lindsay had left me. Monday morning brought another call from Nathan Pierce. "Good news, Mr. Hayes. Bradley's attorney has withdrawn the will contest." Really, that was fast.
Hey, are you
Apparently they
coming down
reviewed
for
all the
dinner
documentation
soon?
and
It's
realized they
almost
had no
ready,
case.
Yeah,
Lindsay's decision-making was
just
thoroughly
finishing this
documented, and
level.
there's no evidence
Be
of
done in
undue
5.
influence on your part.
Alright.
Did they give a reason for dropping it? Officially, they said they determined the will was valid as written. Unofficially, I think they realized they'd be wasting everyone's time and money pursuing a case they couldn't win. I felt a wave of relief. The legal challenge had been hanging over everything, making it hard to fully embrace my new financial security. There's one more thing, Pierce continued. Bradley's attorney asked if you might be interested in a settlement discussion. What kind of settlement, they didn't specify. But given that they've dropped the will contest, I imagine they're looking for some kind of voluntary arrangement. Maybe Bradley hoping you'll share some of the inheritance out of goodwill. What did you tell them that I'd discuss it with you and get back to them? But Mr. Hayes, you're under no obligation to negotiate anything. The will is clear, and Lindsay's wishes are being honored. I'll think about it, but I already knew my answer. Bradley had had 3 years to show goodwill. He'd chosen a different path. That afternoon, I was surprised to get a call from Margaret Wells, the English teacher I'd run into at the library. Gordon, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to check on how you're settling into your new place. It's going well, Margaret. Thank you for connecting me with Mrs. Patterson. I'm glad it worked out. Listen, I have something to ask you. The school district is looking for substitute teachers for the fall semester. Would you be interested in doing some part-time work? The idea caught me off guard. I hadn't considered going back to work, even part-time. I don't know, Margaret. It's been several years since I retired. Shop class hasn't changed that much, and the kids could use someone with your experience and patience. Think about it. After she hung up, I found myself actually considering it. Not because I needed the money anymore, but because I missed the classroom. I miss teaching kids practical skills, seeing them figure out how to solve problems with their hands. Maybe returning to work would be good for me. A way to stay connected, stay useful. Tuesday evening, I was reading in my chair when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a familiar voice. Mr. Hayes, this is Sarah Mitchell. We spoke last week about Bradley. Hello, Sarah. How are you? I'm good, thank you. I'm calling because I thought you should know Bradley was let go from his job today. I'm sorry to hear that. It was his own fault. He'd been missing work, showing up late, making mistakes on client accounts. But Mr. Hayes, he's been telling people it's because of you, because of me. He's claiming that the stress of dealing with your legal harassment has affected his work performance, that you're trying to destroy his life. I sighed. Bradley was apparently committed to blaming everyone but himself for his problems. I thought you should know what he's saying, especially since some people might believe him. I appreciate the heads up, Sarah. There's something else. Bradley cleaned out his desk today and he left some personal papers behind. I thought you might want to see them. What kind of papers? Photos, mainly. Pictures of Lindsay from their wedding, some from their honeymoon, but also some older photos, pictures of Lindsay with you from before she got married. My heart tightened. What about them? They're torn up, Mr. Hayes, ripped into pieces, like he was trying to destroy them. The image of Bradley tearing up pictures of Lindsay and me was almost more than I could bear. Those photos represented years of memories, moments of joy and love that he had no right to destroy. Sarah, would you mind if I came by to see what's left? Of course. I saved everything I could find. I'll be here until 6 p.m. I drove to Bradley's former workplace, a medical supply company in a modern office building downtown. Sarah met me in the lobby, carrying a small box. I tried to put the pieces together, she said, leading me to a quiet corner. Some of the photos can be repaired, I think. She opened the box and showed me fragments of photographs. Lindsay at her high school graduation, with me standing proudly beside her. Lindsay and me working in my garage when she was learning to change oil. Lindsay opening Christmas presents, laughing at something I'd said. All of them torn apart by a man who couldn't stand to see evidence of my relationship with my daughter. I don't understand why he would do this, Sarah said quietly. These were beautiful photos. Bradley couldn't stand that Lindsay loved me, I said simply. It threatened his narrative about who she was and where her loyalty belonged. Sarah helped me gather all the pieces, along with a few photos that had survived intact. As we worked, she talked about Lindsay, how much the other nurses had respected her, how she'd always spoken fondly of her father. She used to bring in cookies you'd made together, Sarah said. She was so proud of those traditions you'd maintained after her mother died. Driving home with that box of torn photographs, I felt a deep sadness that went beyond grief. Bradley hadn't just rejected me, he'd tried to erase me from Lindsay's history. Those photos represented our life together, the bond we'd shared, the memories we'd created, and he'd destroyed them out of spite. Back at my apartment, I spread the photo fragments on my kitchen table and began the careful work of reconstruction. Some were too damaged to save, but others could be pieced back together with patience and tape. As I worked, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door. "Gordon, I brought you some—" "Oh my." She saw the torn photos spread across my table. "What happened?" I explained about Bradley's final act of destruction, his attempt to eliminate evidence of my relationship with Lindsay. Mrs. Patterson sat down across from me, studying the fragments. "This is heartbreaking. But you know what? It doesn't matter what he does to these photos. He can't destroy the memories, can he?" She was right, of course. The photos were just paper and ink. The real memories, teaching Lindsay to drive, watching her graduate nursing school, walking her down the aisle at her wedding, those belonged to me and could never be taken away. "Would you like help putting these back together?" Mrs. Patterson asked. We spent the evening working on the photos, talking quietly about Lindsay and the importance of preserving family memories. Mrs. Patterson had lost her own father years earlier, and she understood the significance of these tangible connections to the past. Wednesday morning brought a call from Kevin Collins. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to let you know Bradley's moving out of the house this weekend. That was fast. He can't make the payments anymore. Found a buyer who's willing to take over the mortgage and give him a little cash to walk away. It's not much, but it'll keep him from foreclosure." "Where's he going?" "Moving in with me temporarily while he figures things out. I told him he could stay in my guest room for a month, maybe 2, give him time to find work and get back on his feet." I appreciated Kevin's loyalty to his brother, even though Bradley probably didn't deserve it. "Kevin, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did Bradley ever show any appreciation for Lindsay? Not just what she could provide for him, but who she was as a person?" There was a long pause. "I think he loved the idea of her, the image of being married to someone successful and respected. But did he appreciate her character, her kindness, her intelligence? I'm not sure he ever really saw those qualities." "That's what I thought." "Mr. Hayes, I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know Lindsay was lucky to have you as a father, and you deserve so much better from our family." Thursday afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Nathan Pierce. "I'd like to respond to Bradley's settlement request." "Oh, what would you like me to tell them?" "That I'm willing to meet with Bradley one more time, but not to negotiate, to give him something." Pierce was quiet for a moment. What kind of something? A chance to understand what he lost, and maybe a chance to do the right thing for once. "Mr. Hayes, are you sure about this?" "You don't owe Bradley anything." "No, I don't, but I owe Lindsay the opportunity to see if her husband is capable of growth." Friday morning, Nathan Pierce called back. "Bradley has agreed to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. at my office. He's bringing his attorney." "That's fine. I'll be there. May I ask what you're planning to say to him?" "I'm going to tell him the truth about Lindsay, about what she saw in their marriage, about what she was trying to protect me from. And then I'm going to make him an offer." "What kind of offer?" "One last chance to honor his wife's memory." Saturday afternoon, I sat in Nathan Pierce's conference room across from Bradley and his attorney. Bradley looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. The stress of losing his job and his financial problems was clearly taking a toll. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," his attorney began. "My client is hoping we can reach some kind of arrangement." "Stop," I said quietly. "I'm not here to negotiate." Bradley looked up sharply. "Then why are we here?" I pulled out a folder, not Lindsay's documentation, but something else. "I'm here to give you something, Bradley. Something I think you need to see." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a letter Lindsay had written to me about 6 months before her death. I'd found it tucked inside one of her nursing textbooks when I was packing her things, a book Bradley had told me to throw away. "Dear Dad," the letter began. "I've been thinking a lot about our family lately, about the future, about what would happen if something ever happened to me. I want you to know how much your love and support have meant to me throughout my life. You taught me to be strong, independent, and kind. You showed me what it means to take care of people, which is why I became a nurse. I'm worried about Bradley sometimes. I think he feels threatened by our relationship, like he has to compete with you for my attention. I've tried to help him understand that love doesn't work that way, that loving you doesn't mean I love him less, but I don't think he gets it. If anything ever happens to me, I want you to know that I've been preparing to make sure you're taken care of. Not because you can't take care of yourself, but because you've taken care of me my whole life, and it's my turn to return the favor. I love you, Dad, always and forever." Lindsay Bradley read the letter slowly, his hands shaking slightly. When he finished, he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen before in his eyes. Not anger or calculation, but something that might have been shame. She knew. he whispered. She knew you felt threatened by me. She knew you were trying to push me out. She knew you resented our relationship. I leaned forward. What she didn't know was how far you were willing to go. Bradley's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Hayes, I'm not sure what the purpose of this. The purpose, I said, is for Bradley to understand what his wife was really thinking in her final months. Not the version he's been telling himself, but the truth. I pulled out another document. This is a copy of one of Lindsay's bank statements from her personal account. Look at the deposits. Bradley studied the statement, his face growing paler. The deposit showed Lindsay putting aside money every month, $500, $800, sometimes $1,000. Money she was quietly saving while Bradley was accumulating debt. She was building a safety net, I continued, not just for me, but for both of us. Because she knew you were spending money you didn't have, making financial decisions that would put everyone at risk. I was investing in our future, Bradley said weakly. You were buying golf clubs and taking weekend trips to Vegas. While your wife worked extra shifts to save money you thought you were entitled to spend. Bradley's attorney put a hand on his client's arm. Perhaps we should take a break. No, Bradley said. Let him finish. I appreciated that. For the first time since Lindsay's death, Bradley was willing to hear something he didn't want to hear. Lindsay loved you, I said quietly. But she also saw who you really were. She saw the selfishness, the entitlement, the way you treated people who couldn't give you what you wanted. And she made a choice to protect the people who needed protecting. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. Which brings me to why I asked for this meeting. Bradley's attorney leaned forward, clearly expecting a settlement offer. I'm going to write you a check, Bradley, for $15,000. Both Bradley and his attorney looked surprised. That was a substantial amount, though, nowhere near half of what Lindsay had left me. Not because you deserve it, I continued. Not because Lindsay would have wanted you to have it, but because you're drowning, and she wouldn't have wanted to see anyone drowning, even you. I wrote out the check and slid it across the table. This is enough to pay off your car loan and maybe one of your smaller credit cards. It's enough to give you a chance to start over without the crushing debt that's been driving your bad decisions. Bradley stared at the check like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. There are conditions, I said. What conditions? First, you drop any future claims against Lindsay's estate. You sign a document saying you're satisfied with what she left you and you'll never contest her decisions again. Bradley nodded slowly. Second, you stop telling people that I manipulated Lindsay or stole money from you. You tell the truth that Lindsay made her own decisions about her money and left it to who she wanted to leave it to, okay? Third, and this is the most important one, you get help, financial counseling, maybe therapy. You figure out why you think you're entitled to things that aren't yours and why you blame other people for your problems. Bradley was quiet for a long moment. And if I don't agree to these conditions, then you get nothing. You figure out your financial problems on your own, and you live with the consequences of your choices. His attorney whispered something in his ear, but Bradley shook his head. I'll take the deal, he said quietly. Why? The question seemed to surprise him because you're right about all of it. Lindsay deserved better than what I gave her, and you deserved better than what I did to you. It wasn't a complete transformation. Bradley still had years of selfishness and entitlement to work through, but it was acknowledgement which was more than I'd expected. Nathan Pierce prepared the necessary documents while we waited. The agreement was straightforward. Bradley would receive $15,000 in exchange for dropping all claims and agreeing to stop spreading false information about me. As Bradley signed the papers, he looked up at me. Can I ask you something? Sure. The safety deposit box, how long had Lindsay been planning that? About 3 years. Since shortly after I moved in with you. He winced. She knew that early that I was going to, that I would. She knew you well enough to prepare for the worst, but she hoped for the better. I loved her, Bradley said, his voice barely audible. I believe you did in your way, but Bradley, love isn't just a feeling. It's how you treat people. It's the choices you make when no one is watching. It's putting someone else's needs before your own. I stood up and gathered my papers. Lindsay loved you enough to hope you'd grow into someone worthy of her. Maybe you still can. As I walked toward the door, Bradley called out to me, Mr. Hayes. I turned back. Thank you. For the check, for the chance. For not giving up on me completely. Don't thank me yet. Thank me by becoming someone Lindsay would have been proud to call her husband. Outside the lawyer's office, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. I'd given Bradley $15,000, money that was rightfully mine, that Lindsay had carefully saved and invested for my future. But I'd also given him something more valuable, a chance to understand the impact of his choices and an opportunity to change. Whether he would take advantage of that opportunity remained to be seen. The check would help with his immediate financial problems, but it wouldn't solve the deeper issues that had created those problems in the first place. Only Bradley could do that work, and it would take time and effort, and probably professional help. As I drove home, I thought about Lindsay and what she would think of my decision. She'd always believed in giving people chances to do better, even when they didn't deserve them. She'd become a nurse because she wanted to help people heal, even when their injuries were self-inflicted. Maybe that's where I got the idea to offer Bradley a way forward instead of just walking away. Not because he deserved it, but because Lindsay had taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. 2 weeks later, I was working in Mrs. Patterson's garden when Kevin Collins stopped by again. This time he looked different, less stressed, more at peace. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to thank you for what you did for Bradley. How's he doing better, I think? He used the money to pay off his car loan and one of his credit cards like you suggested, but more importantly, he's been going to counseling. That was encouraging. Was that his idea or yours? Actually, it was his. He said he needed to figure out why he'd made such a mess of his life, why he'd treated you and Lindsay so badly. Kevin sat down on Mrs. Patterson's porch steps. Can I tell you something? Bradley talked to me about Lindsay last week. Really talked, not just complaining about money or making excuses. He told me he'd never appreciated her while she was alive. That's a start. He also said he understood now why Lindsay left you that money, that you'd been more of a parent to her than he'd been a husband. I stopped weeding and looked up at Kevin. That was more self-awareness than I'd expected from Bradley. There's something else, Kevin continued. Bradley asked me to give you this. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Bradley's handwriting. He wanted to write you a letter. Said there were things he needed to say, but wasn't sure he could say them in person. I opened the envelope and read Bradley's letter. Mr. Hayes, I've been in counseling for 2 weeks now, trying to understand why I treated you and Lindsay the way I did. My counselor says I have something called narcissistic tendencies. I think the world revolves around me and my needs, and I have trouble seeing other people as real people with their own feelings and rights. I know that's not an excuse for what I did to you. Throwing you out of your home, making you feel unwanted and worthless, trying to erase you from Lindsay's life. There's no excuse for any of that, but I want you to know that I'm trying to understand it so I can change. The counselor says it will take time and work, but she thinks I can learn to be different. I also want you to know that I've been thinking about Lindsay a lot, about who she really was, not just who I wanted her to be. She was kind and generous and strong, and she loved you so much. She used to light up when she talked about you, about things you taught her, about memories you shared. I was jealous of that relationship. I wanted to be the only important person in her life, and when I realized I wasn't, I tried to push you out instead of trying to earn my own place. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, for all of it. You were a good father to Lindsay, and you deserve to be treated with respect and gratitude. I gave you neither, and I'm ashamed of that. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost when I chose to treat you as an enemy instead of family. Bradley, I read the letter twice, surprised by its tone. It wasn't perfect, there were still traces of self-pity and excuse-making, but it was honest in a way Bradley had never been before. What did you think, Kevin asked? It's a good start. Real change takes time, but acknowledging the problem is the first step. He's also been attending a financial management class at the community college, learning how to budget, how to live within his means. That's smart, Mr. Hayes. Can I ask you something? Why did you help him after everything he put you through? I thought about that question because Lindsay would have wanted me to. Not because Bradley deserved help, but because she believed in giving people chances to do better. You're a better man than I would have been in your situation. I'm not better. I'm just trying to honor my daughter's memory. Kevin stood up to leave, then turned back. There's one more thing. Bradley wanted me to tell you that he's been looking for a job. He had an interview yesterday at a different medical supply company. If he gets it, it'll be a step down in terms of money and position, but he says he's okay with that. Good for him. He also said he's been thinking about selling Lindsay's wedding ring, not because he needs the money now, thanks to your help, but because he doesn't feel like he has the right to keep it. That caught my attention. What's he planning to do with it? He wanted to know if you'd want it, for memories, or maybe to pass down to future family someday. Lindsay's wedding ring. I'd bought it with her when she and Bradley got engaged, helped her pick out something beautiful but not ostentatious. She'd worn it every day for 4 years, and seeing it on Bradley's finger now felt wrong. Tell him yes, I'd like to have it. After Kevin left, I sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch thinking about second chances and the long road of redemption. Bradley had a lot of work ahead of him if he really wanted to change. Learning to see other people as more than obstacles to his happiness. Learning to appreciate what he had instead of always wanting more. Learning to put someone else's needs before his own. But for the first time, I believed he might actually be trying. That evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with a casserole and news from her own family. My daughter called from Florida, she said as we shared dinner. She wants me to come visit for Christmas, stay for a month, maybe longer. That sounds wonderful. I was wondering, would you be interested in house sitting while I'm gone? Taking care of the plants, collecting the mail, keeping an eye on things? I'd be happy to. And Gordon, there's something else. My daughter thinks I should consider moving to Florida permanently, to be closer to her and the grandkids. I felt a pang at the thought of losing Mrs. Patterson's companionship, but I understood the pull of family. What are you thinking? I'm considering it, but I'd want to make sure the house went to someone who'd take care of it, someone who'd appreciate its history and character. She looked at me meaningfully. Mrs. Patterson, are you offering to sell me your house? I'm offering to sell it to someone who's already proven he's a good neighbor and a careful steward. Someone who's helped me maintain it over these past few months. The idea of owning a house again, of having a real home instead of a rented apartment, was both exciting and overwhelming. I'd need to think about it. Consider the finances, of course. But Gordon, you've brought life back to this place. You've made it feel like a home again instead of just a house where an old woman lives alone. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the future. A month ago, I'd been homeless and nearly broke, cast out by a man who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. Now I had financial security, a possible path back to teaching, and the opportunity to own a home again. More than that, I had the knowledge that my daughter had loved me enough to plan for my future, even while living with someone who resented my very existence. 3 months had passed since that meeting with Bradley in the lawyer's office. I'd settled into a routine in my garage apartment, begun substitute teaching at the high school 2 days a week, and started seriously considering Mrs. Patterson's offer to buy her house. The substitute teaching had been exactly what I needed. Working with teenagers again, teaching them practical skills, seeing them gain confidence as they learn to solve problems with their hands, it reminded me why I'd loved teaching in the first place. It also gave me purpose, beyond my own recovery from grief and betrayal. These kids needed what I had to offer, and I needed to feel useful again. On a crisp October morning, I was grading some basic carpentry projects when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Kevin Collins. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to give you an update on Bradley. How's he doing? Really well, actually. He got the job at the medical supply company. It's about $20,000 less than what he was making before, but he's managing his expenses better now. That's good to hear. He's also been attending a support group for people with financial problems, and he's been seeing his counselor twice a week. I was genuinely pleased to hear about Bradley's progress. Change was possible, but only if someone was willing to do the hard work required. There's something else, Kevin continued. Bradley's been volunteering at the hospital where Lindsay worked. Nothing medical, just helping with patient transport, delivering flowers, that kind of thing. That surprised me. What made him want to do that? He said he wanted to understand what Lindsay's work meant to her, to see the place where she spent so much of her time and energy. How's that going? He told me it's been eye-opening. Seeing how hard the nurses work, how much they care about their patients. He said he never really understood what Lindsay did all day, never appreciated the emotional weight of her job. I thought about Lindsay coming home after difficult shifts, sometimes crying about patients she'd lost, sometimes celebrating small victories in someone's recovery. Bradley had been physically present for those moments, but apparently he'd never really been listening. Mr. Hayes, there's one more thing. Bradley wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet with him again, not about money or legal issues, just to talk. I considered the request. Part of me was curious about Bradley's progress. Another part of me wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation. Did he say what he wanted to talk about? Lindsay, mostly he said he's been remembering things differently now, seeing patterns he missed when she was alive. He wanted to share some of those memories with someone who really knew her. Let me think about it, of course. And Mr. Hayes, thank you again for giving him that chance. I know you didn't have to. After Kevin hung up, I sat in my small apartment thinking about forgiveness and healing. Bradley's request wasn't unreasonable, and maybe talking about Lindsay with someone who'd loved her would be good for both of us. I called Kevin back an hour later and agreed to meet Bradley for coffee. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the atmosphere was comfortable without being fancy. Bradley was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee waiting. He looked different, thinner, but healthier somehow. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and he carried himself with less arrogance than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "Kevin said you wanted to talk about Lindsay." I did. I've been remembering things about her, about our marriage, and I wanted to share them with someone who knew her before I did. Bradley wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. "I was thinking about this one time, about 6 months before she died. She'd had a really bad day at work, lost a patient she'd been caring for weeks, an elderly man who reminded her of her grandfather. I remembered Lindsay's grandfather, my father-in-law. He died when Lindsay was 12, but she'd adored him. Lindsay came home crying," Bradley continued, "really sobbing, not just sad but devastated, and instead of comforting her, I got annoyed. Told her she needed to learn to leave work at work, that she was too emotional to be a good nurse. I winced, imagining how that must have hurt Lindsay. But you know what she did?" Bradley's voice was quiet. She stopped crying, wiped her face, and made dinner anyway. Asked me about my day like nothing had happened. Made sure I was comfortable even though she was the one who needed comfort. That sounds like Lindsay. I never thanked her for that. Never apologized for being such an ass when she needed support. Never even asked her about the patient she'd lost. Bradley took a shaky breath. I've been thinking about all the times she needed me to be a husband and I was just absent. Physically there, but emotionally useless. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us thinking about Lindsay and the different ways we'd failed her. "She used to talk about you a lot," Bradley said eventually, "especially when she was sad or stressed. She'd tell me stories about growing up, about things you taught her, about traditions you maintained after her mother died." "What kind of stories, like how you taught her to change a tire when she was 16, not because you thought she couldn't learn, but because you wanted her to be independent? Or how you used to make pancakes shaped like her initials on Sunday mornings?" I smiled, remembering those Sunday mornings. Lindsay had been delighted by those silly pancakes, even as a teenager. She said you never made her feel like a burden after her mother died, that you reorganized your whole life around her needs without ever making her feel guilty about it. She was my daughter. That's what parents do. That's what good parents do. I didn't understand the difference then. Bradley pulled out his wallet and removed something small wrapped in tissue paper. "I wanted to give you this." He unwrapped Lindsay's wedding ring and placed it on the table between us. The diamond caught the light from the window, sparkling the way it had when she'd first tried it on. "I don't deserve to keep this," Bradley said simply. "It belongs with someone who honored the love it represents." I picked up the ring, feeling its familiar weight. Lindsay had been so excited when we'd picked it out together, so proud to wear it. She deserved a husband who treasured both the ring and what it symbolized. "Thank you," I said, slipping the ring into my pocket. "Mr. Hayes, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you think Lindsay would have been proud of the changes I'm making? Or is it too little too late?" I thought about Lindsay's capacity for forgiveness, her belief in people's ability to grow and change. "I think Lindsay would be glad that you're finally trying to become the man she hoped you could be. Whether it's too late or not, that's not really the point, is it?" Bradley nodded slowly. "The point is to be better. For its own sake, not because someone's keeping score." Exactly. We finished our coffee mostly in comfortable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about Lindsay and the different paths that had brought us to this moment. As we prepared to leave, Bradley said, "Mr. Hayes, I know this might sound strange, but would you mind if I called you occasionally, not often, just sometimes I remember something about Lindsay, and I'd like to share it with someone who knew her. I'd like that, Bradley. And maybe if you ever want to tell me stories about her childhood, about who she was before I met her, I'd like to hear those too." I looked at this man who'd caused me so much pain, who'd thrown me out of my home and tried to erase me from my daughter's life. He was still deeply flawed, still had years of work ahead of him, but he was trying, genuinely trying, to be better than he'd been. "I think Lindsay would like that," I said. 6 months later, I was standing in the living room of my new house, Mrs. Patterson's old house, which I'd bought with part of Lindsay's investment money. Mrs. Patterson had moved to Florida to be near her family, but we kept in touch through letters and occasional phone calls. The house felt like home in a way my apartment never had. I'd painted the walls, updated some of the fixtures, and turned the spare bedroom into a workshop where I could build furniture and work on projects. I'd also taken the full-time substitute position at the high school. The regular shop teacher had taken early retirement, and they'd asked me to finish out the school year. It felt good to be back in the classroom full-time, working with kids who reminded me daily why teaching mattered. My phone rang as I was finishing dinner. It was Bradley, calling as he did every few weeks to share a memory or ask a question about Lindsay. "Mr. Hayes, I was going through some of Lindsay's things today, stuff I'd packed away but finally felt ready to look at. I found her nursing school textbooks. She kept those? All of them, with notes in the margins, highlighted sections, even little drawings in the corners. But there was something else, a letter she'd written to you but never sent. My heart skipped. What did it say? It was about me, actually. About how worried she was that I didn't appreciate you. She wrote about wanting to find ways to help us get along better, to help me understand what an important role you played in her life. Bradley's voice was thick with emotion. She blamed herself, Mr. Hayes, for the tension between us. She thought if she could just find the right words, the right approach, she could make me see what she saw in you. Lindsay always thought she could fix everything. She tried so hard to make us into a family, and I was too selfish and stupid to see what she was offering. Bradley, you can't change the past, but you can honor her memory by continuing to work on yourself. I know, and I am. My counselor says I've made real progress in understanding my patterns of behavior. I still have bad days, but I'm learning to catch myself before I fall back into old habits. That's all anyone can ask. Mr. Hayes, there's something else. I've been accepted into a program to become a patient advocate at the hospital. It's a volunteer position, but if I do well, it could lead to a paid role helping patients navigate the healthcare system. That's wonderful, Bradley. Lindsay would be proud. I hope so. I'm trying to find ways to carry on her work, to help people the way she helped people. After we hung up, I sat in my comfortable living room thinking about the strange turns life can take. A year ago, I'd been homeless and heartbroken, convinced that Bradley Collins was irredeemably selfish and cruel. Now he was slowly becoming someone I could respect, even if I'd never fully trust him. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real, and it honored Lindsay's belief in people's capacity for growth. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box where I kept Lindsay's wedding ring along with some other mementos, her nursing school graduation photo, the letter she'd written me about protecting my future, a pressed flower from her funeral arrangement. Each item told part of the story of who she'd been and how much she'd loved me. But they also told the story of her hope for Bradley, her belief that even difficult people could learn to be better. Looking at these treasures, I realized something important. Lindsay's greatest gift to me wasn't the money she'd saved or the evidence she'd collected. It was the example she'd set of how to love people without enabling them, how to protect yourself while still believing in others' potential for change. She'd seen Bradley's flaws clearly but hadn't given up on him. She'd prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. She'd protected me from his cruelty while leaving the door open for his redemption. That was the kind of wisdom that only comes from loving someone completely, seeing them as they are while believing they can become something better. The next morning, I got a call from Margaret Wells at the school district. They wanted to offer me a permanent position as the shop teacher, with full benefits and the opportunity to develop new programs for teaching practical skills. I accepted immediately. At 59, I was starting a new chapter of my life, one built on the foundation Lindsay had so carefully created for me. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Lindsay was buried. I'd been visiting regularly, always bringing fresh flowers, always spending a few minutes telling her about my life and the changes I was seeing in Bradley. This time, I brought something special, a framed photo I'd had restored from the torn pieces Bradley had destroyed. It showed Lindsay and me at her nursing school graduation, both of us beaming with pride and joy. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, placing the photo against her headstone. "I wanted to show you this. I know you'd be happy to see it whole again." I sat on the bench nearby and watched the afternoon sun filter through the trees. Bradley's doing better. He's not the same man who threw me out of the house, and he's not perfect, but he's trying. You'd be proud of him for that. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above me, and for just a moment I could almost feel Lindsay's presence. Not in any supernatural way, but in the knowledge that love endures even after death, that the care we show each other creates ripples that continue long after we're gone. "Thank you, baby girl," I whispered, "for everything, for the money, for the planning, for the protection, but mostly for showing me that sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal exactly who they really are, and then giving them the chance to become someone better." I stood up, kissed my fingers, and touched them to her name carved in the marble. "I love you, Lindsay, always and forever." Walking back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before her death, genuine peace. Not the absence of grief that would always be with me, but the presence of purpose and the knowledge that Lindsay's love would continue to guide me forward. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's justice served exactly when it's needed most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes with a hefty bank balance and the knowledge that the child you raised turned out to be exactly the person you hoped she'd become. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. The most powerful revenge isn't hurting someone who wronged you. It's building a life so secure and meaningful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, don't waste energy trying to change them. Invest that energy in protecting yourself and the people who truly matter.